Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole to the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I am Mike Brown. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us on this week's adventure. And it's a guest we had recently is back.
Yes, and with his incredible co-author, Karen Newell, and of course the remarkable Dr. Eben Alexander. I am so happy that we've been able to continue this conversation with them because the last one was so impactful, I think, for like both of us and then everybody else that, right. I mean, we couldn't just stop at one episode.
No, for sure. And this time we're talking about their book, Living in a Mindful Universe, among other things. And it's a neurosurgeon's journey into the heart of consciousness. And it is a fantastic book. It has so much in it. It's not a very big book. It's like 250 something pages, but it is packed full of really valuable information about what Dr. Alexander went through and how he and Karen sort of implement what they've learned through his experiences into their lives.
Yeah, that's what I love so much about this conversation is that it's not a remote conversation about an incident that happened to him, which was absolutely phenomenal. You know, he had this near-death experience, and it was, I mean, the information that he brought back about what consciousness is once it leaves the body was so powerful. But yet, now what? Now, what do you do with that information? And this is what that's about, is how does this now apply to people who have not had that experience? And do we need to have that experience in order to understand it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would rather not have to have that experience. But, right. But in the book, they talk about how there are experiences that people have that are not near-death experiences that lead them toward this sort of growth. And we'll talk to them about that in our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to get to it because I know that this is going to be as great, if not greater, than the last one. So let's get on it.
Let's do it.
Look, Bumble knows you're exhausted by dating. All the must not take yourself too seriously and 6'1" since that matters. And what do I even say other than, hey? Well, that's why they're introducing an all-new Bumble, with exciting features to make compatibility easier, starting the chat better, and dating safer. They've changed, so you don't have to. Download the new Bumble now.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
All right. Okay. Well, let's kick into this. So Thank you, both of you, for being here today, because we had such an amazing conversation the last time that, I mean, we knew we had to do it again. Karen, thank you so much for wanting to join in on this. It is so great to have you. And I want to start with you, is that tell us a bit about your background. How did you come into this? How did you and Eben connect?
Well, I spent, just like everyone, I had a job. I had spent 25 years in the publishing industry. And during that time, I always had this sort of undying interest in the answers to big questions. Why are we here? What is our purpose? As kids, we're always asking these questions, and they stayed with me. And I wasn't satisfied with the answers coming from conventional sources, say, of science and religion. And so I was exploring other kind of ways of looking at the world. So different types of esoteric spiritual texts and so on. And what I learned is I learned a lot about different experiences people have had, different spiritual experiences. And I learned that we all have the capacity to have such experiences. And that's when I set upon maybe a 3-year kind of very focused interest. All my vacation time was spent going to workshops, taking courses. Back then it was all in person, not too many online courses, but I had a few online courses before it came so popular. But then along the way, I met Eben. And so this is where I was at a workshop using sound to get into expanded states of consciousness. And I had great success with this. My meditation skills were horrible, and these types of sounds really helped me get there. And that's where I met Eben. He had begun to come to these sound workshops as well, and we found ourselves at the same one. So I knew that he had a near-death experience, and other people had told me that he was a neurosurgeon. And that, to me, I wasn't interested in the neurosurgery. I was interested in what did you learn from that near-death experience? I knew spiritual experiences could be incredibly powerful and transformative. So I wanted to know, what did you learn, not what happened? And he says to me, I learned the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I was so confused. And I said, well, why would anyone think that it does? Because at that point, I was well beyond the idea that only the physical world was real, and that really our consciousness, our inner world, is what really is what we should be focused on, because that has an ability to actually influence the world around us in ways I really didn't understand by reading about it until I found out for myself. And for me, I thought, well, people who'd had near-death experiences usually learn some personal lesson in love or how to have more compassion for people. And of course, Eben learned those things as well, but he was very focused on this scientific worldview that had completely been flipped. And so because I understood that point of view from kind of a lived experience, that I think is what interested Eben. And we, of course, felt this very strong personal connection, this kind of recognition that was a little bit overwhelming, but it was like coming home to something very familiar, very comforting, very safe. And I think our souls recognized each other, and Eben quickly let me know that I was part of this grand mission to, help the world. And I was like, no, I don't do that. Resistance is futile, as you can see, because here I am with Eben, and he always invites me to everything. And so thank you so much for including me.
Oh, it was just the next logical step. I mean, as we were talking in the last conversation, it was like, well, this is just what we have to do. So yeah, I love how you're talking about believing versus knowing, and that's something that you guys talk about in Living in a Mindful Universe, and you're in the last book. And that's something that really connects with me. And one of the things that you just mentioned, Karen, is how there was this connection between the two of you. And I had that happen a number of years ago, oddly enough, with an actor who I knew on television as a child, who I had this immediate draw to. And we ended up connecting later in life. I looked for him, and I didn't mention anything about that connection because I'm like, he's going to think I'm absolutely insane. And it turned out that later on, when we did connect, he started to message me a lot and had all these questions for me. And I was going, okay, what is going on here? I don't understand what's happening. And he said, he came back to me in a message and said, look, he's like, please don't hang up on me. He's like, I don't want you to think I'm nuts. But he's like, I've been looking for you. And he said, as soon as I saw your picture come up, he's like, I knew that I had to talk to you. He was like, but you're going to think this is crazy, but you feel like home to me. and he said to me, he's like, well, he's like, I need to know why you messaged me. Why did you get a hold of me? And I said, because that's what I felt when I saw you when I was very, very young. And it was so strange. And we ended up like this. It was, like to the point where we had the same mannerisms. We had like, you'd swear that the two of us were related. Like I'm one of the very few people in my family with blue eyes with a ring around them. He has the same eyes. Really, really strange, but that story reminds me so much of exactly what I went through and connected with. So, but moving on from that, this believing versus knowing, I think that's one thing that is really important to get across, is that this isn't a belief system that we're talking about. This is an internal knowing. Can we talk about that a little bit here?
Well, yeah, I think to me that was one of the kind of shocking realizations of my near-death experience. Is a lot of it occurred in a setting of what I call knowledge through identification, where deep in the spiritual journey, you start becoming all these different elements of the scene. And in fact, at the deepest level, for example, in the core realm, that kind of sanctum sanctorum of the divine, where I kind of recognized that my very conscious awareness was sourced in that God force of pure love and the core of the universe. It's just this knowing. I mean, it's very different from kind of an understanding or kind of observation of other information. It seems to be kind of deeply personal, and this feeling of, oh, you're home is exactly what I was feeling in the spiritual realms, and especially especially in that core realm where that sounds very exotic to people, where all dualities resolve into oneness, and it's kind of the realm of pure creativity, and yet it felt so familiar and so much like home. And in many ways, that's kind of what I felt. I came back to this world and trying to make sense of it. But when I met Karen, I just knew that we had been involved in this work before. Our souls had done this before, and felt this very kind of rich interconnection with her. Although I would be the first to tell you that she's far more intuitive than I am, I must say that out of the get-go starting gate, I was the one who definitely picked up on our connection.
We miss the stuff that's closest to us, right? It's hardest to see our own purpose in life, for example. Yeah. I wanted to add this bit about knowing versus believing. You can read all day long about the amazing statistics that are found in the studies of remote viewing, for example. That's sort of a form of precognition, I'll say. And but you also learn that everyone has the capacity to do this. And so instead of just believing the stats and going around telling everyone, yes, remote viewing is this and that, I took classes in remote viewing and I found, yes, I can do it. Not every time successfully, but the times that I was most successful, and this is why I bring this up, I felt this sort of physical shift in my body of kind of like warmth, recognition kind of thing, just something that shifted. And those experiences when I was drawing, those pictures and writing down my impressions from those particular viewings, they were the most successful when I had this sort of feeling in the body. I took a spoon bending class once. And when I finally bent the spoon, I felt the same sort of thing, this kind of, and for everyone, it'll be different, right? We're all going to find sort of different ways to describe these feelings, but something physical seems to happen. And if you're paying attention, you can notice that. It's kind of what Eben's talking about, that knowledge through identification. But until you kind of experience that in a small way, it is hard to understand. So knowing through direct experience is certainly way more convincing than just reading some data.
Oh gosh, is that ever the truth? I remember decades ago when I first started to delve into parapsychology, my business partner at the time and she's a best friend of mine, and we really started with the idea that I think so many do, which is this phenomenon that's out there. It's something that's out there that you can go and dabble in and experience. And we really quickly realized that it's not an out there thing. It's an in there thing. And it's so much involved with us, with our emotions, with our mindset, with all of these pieces all come together to make this phenomenon amazing. And you guys talk about something in Living in a Mindful Universe, which I talked about in my book, The Gift of Instinct, as well, which was David Chalmers' The Hard Problem. And I think what we're talking about here is it kind of links back in with that, this idea that consciousness is not fundamental or emergent, but rather it's fundamental to the universe, that it's not emergent, it's not coming through the brain as we're talking about here. And that's a really hard concept for people to get around who are very strict materialists. In fact, the question's impossible to answer if you're a materialist. But I think we're really kind of delving into that. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's sometimes where people get stuck.
That makes a lot of sense, and that is something that in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we really took multiple different angles to get at this conclusion, of primacy of consciousness. So you start with that hard problem of consciousness in philosophy of mind, and David Chalmers' demonstration that materialism doesn't give us any kind of ready access to explaining phenomenal experience based on the neurochemical workings of the brain. But then we go beyond that to things like, in philosophy of mind, the binding problem, the apparent unity of consciousness within an individual. Everything that I see, hear, body sensation, orientation in space, memory of past events, executive function, projecting future, every bit of it is this unified whole. And if it were all these neuronal populations contributing their little bits, you'd think it would all be very fragmented. But no, it's a unified whole from the get-go. And so that's kind of a deep mystery to this scientific endeavor. And then you get to all the evidence for non-local consciousness in parapsychology. Remote viewing, as Karen just mentioned, which is one of the most proven fields in modern science, demonstrating the primacy of mind. Jessica Utz, who was the head of American Statistical Association in 2015, gave a presidential address where she said precognition and remote viewing had been demonstrated beyond any reasonable scientific doubt to be true phenomena.
And didn't she ask the audience, what's going to convince you?
Yeah.
An audience of
Yes.
materialists, what's going to convince you? More data?
The whole crowd said they want their own personal experience.
But they want to wait around like Eben for it to just, happen. And I can tell you'll be waiting a long time if it's not part of your journey, but you can cultivate it through these different practices. And that's what I tell them. Then get off that chair and start learning some practices if you really want to know, and you'll find out, oh my gosh, and then you can't deny it. It's so easy. We were talking family members who are materialists, and they're just like, happened to bring up remote viewing. And I'm like, oh, you're going to bring up remote viewing. Oh, it's been debunked. And I'm like, oh, I see. And it's so funny how they're so convinced. And yet I've done it myself. I've seen other people do it quite successfully. There's no way I would be denying of that. So that personal experience is so critical.
And of course, in our modern era, a lot of people just go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia immediately tells you that remote viewing is pseudoscience.
Yeah.
But that just means Wikipedia is a pseudo encyclopedia. They don't get facts at all right. So, but anyway, in our book, we take that whole non-local consciousness of parapsychology. So it's not just, the remote viewing but you have things like telepathy, especially between identical twins. 35% of twins have powerful telepathic experiences. And then you've got near-death experiences, shared death, which are just like near-death. And then you find, as Karen is a real expert in the literature in hospice and terminal care, showing that the very same things happen there. Your loved ones who have passed over come to escort you over.
You even start a life review in hospice. They're sent back to the beginning of their life. They remember all the loving connections. They may process things that they never really addressed, like people who were in wars and such. So pretty identical to near-death experiences.
So really, in Living the Mindful Universe, we simply take all that information and even a broader set of categories of the parapsychological information. For example, reincarnation, that whole scientific database, is figured into the equation. And you just realize consciousness and the brain-mind connection are far more fascinating and kind of spiritually deep aspect of our existence. And as I like to say, we're spiritual beings in the spiritual universe, and that's a scientific truth. So the more we can come to investigate all of these things and make sense of them, and personal experience being especially important for any individual who's interested in this through meditation, centering prayer, what have you, that's how we start getting to some answers.
Oh, absolutely. And you touched on so much there that I think is really important. The one thing being Wikipedia. We just did an episode recently that will be out now by the time this airs, but about Wikipedia and just how much people will sabotage this information in order to manipulate it into their own viewpoint and their own agenda without or distorting the facts completely. Mike, I mean, we had a long conversation with Craig Wheeler about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he essentially he's made it his mission to debunk the debunkers on Facebook, and it's pretty fascinating work. So, yeah, if you like we say, this will be out by the time.
Oh, good.
Good. I'm glad that's part of your repertoire, because too many people are just dismissed by Wikipedia, and including Eben's page is a mess.
Just a joke.
And then when you try to engage them to make corrections, they just you don't count if you're the primary source. Right. You don't have a say on your own page. So,
but it's much worse than what they consider sources. Yeah, they would take like Esquire magazine, which has very shoddy, fact checking. I mean, a joke of fact checking, if anything, and then pretend that it's a better resource than, say, the Journal of Near-Death Studies or the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, which are peer-reviewed scientific journals.
But then what they said about, I engaged with Wikipedia for a while on this directly, and what they said about that source is, they're believers. And it's like, okay, so they don't count. It's so strange, but you know.
Yeah.
You know.
We know. we know. Yeah, this has been a sort of a bee in our bonnet for a while, between the what goes on online and sort of trying to remove this information and some of the stuff that's out there media wise and whatever as well. There's an interesting point in the book that I think really relates to this, which was the debate on perception with Sean Carroll. And I thought this was so fascinating. And his answer basically to the argument of consciousness was sort of the way he painted it was really quite shocking to me, actually, that all the major theorists are basically dead and they figured it all out and that's it. And I had to read that like 3 times because when this to me is the problem. Like, this right here is the problem, that science seems to have become this, or this perception of science seems to have become this stilted worldview, this sort of scientism worldview, that's it, that's all, everything's been figured out. Like, isn't this the mindset that's shutting down the exploration into this field?
Right. Yeah.
It is. They've already made up their mind. So they're not really open-minded. And isn't that really the stalwart characteristic of a true scientist, is someone who's open-minded to all possibilities? And they're not. So I'm not sure they can really call themselves scientists. Eben calls it a faith-based religion.
It is. I mean, materialist science is absolutely a faith-based religion that has less to support it than some of the faith-based religions. So I'm talking about quantum-informed science, though. There you really start getting into a far more powerful vision of the world. And that's where I would also point out for the audience that in the year 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics was given out for entanglement. That's something that's been at the core of quantum physics. It's been studied deeply for at least the last 4 to 5 decades experimentally. And for the Nobel Committee to finally say entanglement is real is basically saying that the local realism that Einstein so adored and as such a bedrock piece of modern science is not true, and that consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness is what ultimately creates emergent physical reality. And I'm sure there are quantum physicists out there like Sean Carroll who will say, no, entanglement doesn't have anything to do with consciousness, but he's missing the very obvious. And that is, as our mental field, in dreams and in imagination, in our mind, we can, encompass the entire universe and all of eternity. All of that is fair game. And entanglement is simply a demonstration of very concrete information channels across time and space that defy our traditional materialist models of causality. And mind and kind of mental phenomena are right at the heart of what entanglement is showing us. It's basically the quantum field made manifest.
And I would say, I'm not a scientist, so you can beat me up afterwards here, but I think that entanglement is really demonstrating the binding force of love. And isn't it, you brought up Sean Carroll at that debate. He kind of questioned that. He's like, well, yeah, I love my wife. I know about love. Why are you bringing that message back? Why aren't you telling us the secrets of the universe? Like, love isn't good enough for Sean Carroll. And what I think we're missing is that love is the most important thing. We all know this. In fact, that's what happens when you're lying in bed, you're getting ready to die. Maybe when you get a terminal diagnosis, what is the first thing? The loving bonds you share with everyone, all those entanglements of relationships that you have. That's what matters on your deathbed. And so to kind of dismiss that as, well, there's got to be something else more important. It's like not acknowledging love is the most important thing. And when you look around our world, it doesn't seem like at first glance that is really the currency that is running our world. And so that to me is what we should all be focused on, is how do we bring more love into our lives? And this is what changes lives. This is what transforms people, is touching that energetic source that we all came from. I would even say it's really our birthright as humans to get to know that. I wanted to know, this was before I met Eben, more about my heart. I wanted to know, and I was one of those people who suppressed my emotions, thought I was always happy, didn't have any problems. But when I started meditating, I found, yes, I do. I had suppressed very deep feelings of abandonment and loneliness. And that was really preventing me from going deeper into my own psyche. And once I kind of got through this abandonment that I was holding in my heart, that's when I discovered that love. And it started with just generating feelings of gratitude in the heart. At first, you think of things you're grateful for, but soon, as you start to really put yourself into those past situations, you can reinvigorate those feelings. And when you start to do that regularly, you discover that love. And then you realize, oh my gosh, yes, this is the most important thing. And when people start to live their lives that way, as more and more people begin to do this, that's when we'll start to see real change in our world.
And remember that a lot of what we call love in this world is conditional. I'll love you if, and even parent-child, you'd think that'd be a pretty pure form of love, but many times it's quite conditional. And yet what near-death experiencers and spiritual journeyers will talk about is unconditional love that has tremendous power to bring healing and wholeness into our lives. And to me, that's been one of the biggest gifts of this, my NDE in the 16 years since then, is exploring and diving deeply into this concept of love and its importance in co-creating the universe of our dreams. And this is something I've found Karen to be an incredibly important mentor, spiritual mentor, about these facets of love and how important unconditional love is.
And love is another one of those things that you can't understand it by reading about it. I sure did not. And often it's the lack of love, the problems that come with love that really teach us about love. There's no way out but through, and really going through that is what really brings that knowledge firsthand. So I hope Sean Carroll is faced with certain situations in his life where he does eventually understand, yep, love is the answer.
Sean's a smart guy. I think he'll figure this out.
We'll see.
As a particle physicist, I remember at that debate, he was talking about looking for spiritual particles as if they would be different from anything else, not recognizing that all those virtual particles popping in and out of the quantum field have to do with consciousness. And consciousness then starts to arrange all of that. And in fact, when we dig deep into the material world around us, we find none of it is made of anything that we would call real, like the big objects in our world, but all the electrons, protons, photons, etc., they're quantum particles. They can be in multiple places at once, created in the same event. They're entangled in ways that completely violate our normal notions of causality and four-dimensional space-time.
Sounds like love to me.
Yeah, it sounds like love and entanglement and the sense of connection and kind of the universality of it, I think, is important. Because it's not just kind of an idealism of kind of individual minds, but it's a evolutionary panentheism of kind of this God force of united consciousness that we all share. And it's shared throughout the cosmos. And mind comes first before matter. That's the important thing that quantum physics has been screaming at us for the better part of a century.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh, so much of that. I so connect with that because it really is. It's about it actually reminds me of Abraham Hicks, of one of the famous channelers. I remember them saying, and they've said this multiple times throughout their work and messages, is the fact that love has nothing to do with somebody else's behavior. And I always thought that was so key. And they said that's where unconditional love comes from. It's not dependent on someone else's behavior. Is that you love anyway. You love because you are love. You don't love because of what somebody else is doing or not doing. And that definition to me always stuck with me. It is so profound. But you guys talk about something in the book that I can't wait to get into. And Mike and I talk about this all the time in another context, but the supreme illusion. And this is I think one of the neatest concepts, and we were talking a little bit about it just now with the idea that that matter doesn't come before mind. Mind does come first. So let's talk a little bit about the supreme illusion, because I think this really is getting to the heart of where we want to go.
Well, I think the main point I would make about the supreme illusion is, we all think that physical universe out there is a reality that we experience directly. And one of the biggest messages from quantum physics is no. That is not the case, that you're experiencing a kind of a naked physical reality. What we get is a dashboard that kind of gives us enough information that we need to survive, but it's not the ultimate. In fact, the ultimate reality is completely beyond time and space and our conceptions of it. And so what this reminds us of is that the mind and brain are extremely clever at convincing us that all the out there is out there. And yet, in many ways, it's an illusion. In ancient traditions called it the Maya. Things are not as they seem. And to really emphasize that, the supreme illusion simply stresses that what you're experiencing in this observing of the world around us is all happening within mind. Every bit of it is within mind. And of course, we have this kind of overlap between minds, and we can share enough information to know that we have something of a shared reality. But ultimately, all of that out there is occurring within mind. And I know Karen has been a beautiful teacher to me of the concept that the inner world and the outer world are deeply related. And essentially what we're saying with the supreme illusion is the outer world is inner world. And therefore
the outer world is a reflection.
It's a reflection of your inner world. Yeah. But ultimately, they're all kind of inner world. We don't have any knowledge about an outer world, a basic, fundamental, original reality. And so the supreme illusion is very important to keep in mind that it's ultimately all mental, and that helps to remind us that the more we can influence our mental space in that inner world, it does have beautiful, beneficial effects on the outer world.
and something to remember about that is, we're very limited. Our senses, for example, our hearing, we're only hearing 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. What about all the other hertz? And are we hearing everything that's possible to be heard between 20 and 20,000? Or is it just a sort of a limited scale? Because I know when Eben heard sounds, and others too have heard sounds during their spiritual experience, we tried to duplicate them here using our sacred acoustics audio technology. And Eben was never satisfied that it was meeting the same kind of quality control of the spiritual realm. And so that really shows us that we're really limited in what we're able to understand. So
Yeah, and in Karen's analogy there, also in talking about electromagnetic radiation, our eyes can see visible light. But if you compare that range of spectrum that we can see with all that's available in the physical universe, it's the visible light would be like the layer of paint on the 102nd floor of the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building is the entire range of electromagnetic radiation. We only have access to that tiniest little sliver of the visual spectrum, and there's so much more out there. So we have a very, very deeply kind of coded version of reality.
And it's different for each of us, right? Because all of us have different hearing deficiencies, for example. Some of us might not hear a certain frequency. Animals, and animals, they can hear more than us in some cases. And so to sit around and think that we know how our world operates because of how we observe it is folly, because our observations are incomplete.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, Mike, just before you get into your story here, I'll just quickly mention, because you've literally bridged into Mike's number one question.
Awesome.
which is really great. Is that, like, I've got a little python at home, and he's been my little boy for 20 years. He's gonna be 20 in June, and his life and his ability to perceive the world is so much greater than ours, because he's able to see heat. He's got heat receptors that are connected with his vision. He can taste the air and tell you what direction smells are coming from. The amount he can see and experience is so much greater than what we have the ability to. And there's times, and actually one just happened very recently, where I am 99.999% positive that he is seeing some beings come and visit, because he will greet somebody in midair that I can't see, because he has greetings for the people that he loves and recognizes. And he sees somebody there, and he will interact with them for anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes. And he's so excited, and he looks at me, and he looks at this, whoever it is, like, Mom, can you see? It's, someone's come to visit me. And, all I have to do is just, wow, who is it, Galen? That's great. They've come to visit. How are you? I can't see anything, but he is absolutely convinced. And what's fascinating is that when they disappear, he watches whatever it is either disappear through a wall or out the window or whatever. And then he's looking around for a minute like, oh, they left. I'm like, oh, did they go? And he's, yeah, it's like, oh, they're gone. Oh, well. And then off he goes. But he absolutely sees somebody come to visit. I don't know who it is. I don't know whether it's my dad, because my dad passed away a number of years ago.
That's beautiful.
Maybe a snake.
It is the coolest thing. He absolutely has taught me so much, because his perception is so unique. And bless his heart. Yeah. One of the biggest teachers, but Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, because you've had something very interesting go on over the last number of years in your life.
Yeah. So, my hearing is starting to go, and it's interesting for somebody who does audio for a living. It's kind of a fascinating thing to be enduring. But as my hearing goes, I have tinnitus that's very, very loud. And there's a lot of, actually, recently, I've noticed there's a lot of things holding me in this physical world that it's like I want to escape into meditation. I want to be able to, be more mindful, but I've got this ringing siren in my ears. So
I listen to things with binaural beats and all that kind of stuff. I listen to white noise, different types of noise. Nothing makes it go away. It's a very high-pitched ring. And I'm trying to come to terms with it in a way, in a spiritual way. What is it about this that what do I need to learn? Sure, I'm trying to practice acceptance because, I believe that acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. However, there's always a but. But what is this trying to teach me? What am I not doing, or what do I need to do? Because I feel like this is the sort of the last bastion, or maybe it's the bastion I can see. It's the one thing that is really preventing me from moving forward. There's a lot going on with me physically that is just like, I feel like I'm stuck. I'm just stuck, and this is a big part of it.
Well, and have you listened to a variety of, for example, the Sacred Acoustics recordings? And do you find that any of them have any influence on the tinnitus at all?
I haven't been able to listen to all of them, but I've listened to a few, but I have an extremely loud.
What I can tell you is the very first live event that Eben and I did, we had these giant speakers and we were playing this recording to the group. It was really a kind of experimental. But one of the people in the audience said, "Oh my gosh, I suffer from horrible tinnitus." And this was the first time that it was kind of canceled out. And so through experience with others who have told me similar things, what I've learned is what you're listening to needs to be related to what you're hearing in your ear. It either needs to be the same frequency, so it kind of gets canceled out, or it needs to be at least harmonic to what you're listening to. Because if you're listening to some sound that's creating sort of disharmony, that's not going to work for you. So you're not alone, first of all. In fact, we sent a newsletter out a couple months ago on this exact topic because we get so many people with this issue. Some people will say when they listen to our recordings that it causes tinnitus, but when I look into that further, that's not the case. They may be hearing a sound temporarily that kind of reminds them of what they were listening to. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. But finding the exact frequency that somehow works best with the one you're hearing in your ear, that's your strategy. And so that's, I think, why Eben was asking, have you tried? There's 1-minute samples on our website. It may not be on our website that you find it, but the highest pitched one that you'll find is, I would suggest, light body. And it varies throughout. And it's interesting because the highest pitched frequencies usually come at the end of our recordings. And those are the beta frequencies that are designed to wake you up. And sometimes people hear those frequencies and they say, "Oh my God, that was my favorite part." Or they say they hated it, right? So just listen to what I'm saying. There's a very wide range of responses and very unique and personal to you. And that tinnitus creates another variable for you to kind of learn what works best for you. But I wouldn't stop with Sacred Acoustics. I'd be listening. You can even get just frequency generators and, an app, and find what frequency is it that you're hearing in your ear. Other people have told me that these are messages that angels are speaking to you. I know when I've had temporary tinnitus, because mine comes and goes. It's never been constant. I've tried to get messages. It's never worked for me. I'm not just saying that other people might get messages, but for me, that wasn't the case. I can't imagine a constant ringing as somebody trying to get your attention, I think it's a physical kind of deficiency that is your issue to heal with, right? We all need one that's driving us crazy and, oh my God, whatever it is. Some people it's cancer. Some people it's alcoholism,
The challenges can be gifts.
And going through that frustration and kind of hitting bottom and surrendering and all those things we do, that's part of your journey to get there.
Yeah, this is kind of why I know that it's just another thing, because you mentioned alcoholism. I'm grateful that I'm an alcoholic because I was driven to spirituality in such a way that I wouldn't have been otherwise. And, I crashed and burned when I was 23 years old, and I haven't looked back, it's kind of amazing that that it takes something so dark in such a dark place, like, for example, Eben's NDE, for you to hit that turning point where you just are off in another direction all of a sudden.
Yes.
And I think you're right. This is exactly what this is for me. It's just another turning point. It'll take me to another level once I learn what I need to learn.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to that as you were, speaking about the issue, and having that level of knowledge. Oh my gosh. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because before you have that knowledge, oh, this is one of those things, as you say, before you have that knowledge, the first time is the hardest. And then once you have that realization, so I think you're going to be fine.
I think so too.
No less frustrating,
Yeah,
right? No
yeah.
less frustrating.
You're in it,
That intellectual kind of understanding of it is so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think what we're talking about here too is analogous to so much, is that it's about finding that frequency, not just in audio, but in life, in our emotions, in our, every single thing is about, again, finding that frequency. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up when they're trying to, create, manifest, shift their world around. I know, as being in parapsychology for so long, I often will get emails and people coming to me and saying, all this phenomenon is going on in my house. I don't know what to do about it. And it more often than not, if it's not, somebody that they know, it is a reflection of the emotional state that they've got going on. And it
Like a projection.
Almost like
of
a projection.
their energy.
Yeah, or something that they've attracted that's equal to what's going on in their environment. And I wrote a book about this a number of years ago called Teaching the Living, and it was really about getting people to understand exactly what we're talking about, which is what we're seeing and experiencing in our outer world is a direct reflection of what we've got going on. And it's like, as soon as we can identify and look inwards and stop kind of blaming that outside, then there's the direction. The direction will come if you can kind of look in your environment and see whether it be, oftentimes it's in my field, it's people coming to me with poltergeist phenomenon or something like that, but it doesn't have to be. It can be reflected in so many different areas. I'd love to chat about that a little bit.
I'm sorry.
You'd like to chat about?
Well, just the idea that our frequency is or finding our frequency and figuring out what we've got going on the outside of us is really, really intertwined. Like, those things are very reflective of our own emotional state, stuff that's unhealed, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the frequency, that's kind of the energy that you're constantly sort of emanating to the world. And for me, that resides in the heart. The work of heart math talks about the electromagnetic field of the heart that's constantly expanding and contracting, and it actually influences the people around you. So it's kind of like you're picking up information into the world, and the heart sends more information to the brain and the brain sends to the heart. So to me, you're picking up that information, sending it up to the brain, and your linguistic center puts kind of words to it and meaning. So that's maybe potentially a way to partially explain, intuitive feelings and such, although they're not, as Eben would say, that local. They go much further than an electromagnetic field. But the thing is we can learn to manage that field. I call it, you say managing your frequency. I would say managing your heart resonance, but it's the same exact thing because it involves managing your thoughts, your emotions, your belief systems, all of that sort of non-physical part of you that, materialist science would tell you is just a result, of neurons interacting in the brain. That's really the essence of who you are. That's who you are deep down inside, that combination of your beliefs, your emotions, your hopes, your dreams, all the things you want to see that, unfold in your life. So if you're very much kind of, I'll use myself as an example, tied up without even realizing in feelings of abandonment, how in the world ever are you going to make a real, true connection with someone if deep down, you're unconsciously feel as though you've been abandoned and you don't need anyone to help you? How are you supposed to then go and have effective, healthy relationships? Well, you're not. And so I had failed relationships up until I had that realization inside. And once I was able to release that deep loneliness, really just recognize that it was a part of me and release it, it was replaced with this kind of feeling of having this wonderful team, but it also shifted the resonance in my heart so that a couple years later, when I met Eben, then we were able to recognize that essence of who we were. If I was still tied up inside and he was still tied up inside, feeling abandoned from his adoption as a baby, we would maybe not have recognized each other, right? Or we would have recognized each other's wounds, but not necessarily the full potential of love that we could possibly share. And so I always say that focusing on my inner world had a way of rearranging my outer world. And before that, I was all interested in, well, what do I need to do? What job do I need to have? Where do I need to live? Who do I need to be involved with? And when I let all of that go and just look for that inner peace inside, creating that love, replacing that abandonment with a feeling of connection, that's when everything changed. And I didn't have to do anything except to be that essence of what I had uncovered. So that to me is how I would explain this frequency that you're talking about. So often when people talk about raising their frequency, to me, that sounds a little bit amorphous. Like, what does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
And what it means to me is really just clearing those non-beneficial emotions and finding that pure essence of your soul, really, that non-physical part of you. Call it what you will. Soul is an easy word for me, but not for everyone. And so that is what is most important. And it plays a huge role in healing. In fact, Eben often talks about mind over matter, where, and when I think of mind over matter, I think of affirmations, right? But you need to have that emotion, sort of that emotional intention wrapped up in that affirmation in order for it to be really helpful. And so to me, it's less mind over matter than spirit over matter, because it involves that full frequency of who you are, not just a thought that you create in that moment to create an affirmation. So yes, bringing your full frequency to bear in any of this is really important in order to really be the most whole you can be.
And to me, this whole discussion of frequency is really kind of a discussion of resonance and of shared common frequency. And that is something that we can appreciate, in personal experience through emotions. And I know Karen has helped me a lot in my own work with meditation and trying to manifest the world of my dreams by helping me understand that emotional engagement. So in other words, going in and wanting to achieve a particular goal, say in an interaction with someone else or something, is not about the cognitive, intellectual statement of what you want, but it's more about the feeling in your heart of successfully achieving that. And in many ways, for me, that kind of thinking has helped me to recognize that resonance, that kind of combination of similar frequencies that we share in terms of getting to a deeper understanding of these relationships and our relationship with the universe at large.
And resonance is just that concept of like attracts like, which is law
Love
of
attraction. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. You guys are speaking my language. Let me tell you, like it's so refreshing to have these conversations, because I think so many people, they do get hung up on that emotional aspect of it, which is exactly what you were saying, Karen, where they think, well, wishful thinking is not going to make something happen. I've written this down a million times and nothing's gone on and whatever. And it's like the emotional component is the key.
Or it's a limiting belief. They have a belief deep down that they really can't achieve it, and they got to tackle that first. You got to tackle those limiting beliefs as well.
I think the beliefs are especially critical. Most of our societal beliefs, I would say, are falsely limiting. And in fact, your beliefs will lead towards your reality. And for me as a healer, as a neurosurgeon, most obvious examples come in healing. And you can, for example, point to placebo effect. Now, many people think, it's a sugar pill fixing a headache, but placebo effect can be extremely powerful. And from my perspective, just shows how much power we have to bring healing and wholeness to ourselves. And that's why it's just so important to get this. But then you've got a whole new level over and beyond placebo effect in the form of spontaneous remission. So, for example, if you go to noetics.org and put in a search term, spontaneous remission, you'll find a book that they put out at Noetic Sciences back in the mid-1990s of more than 3,500 cases of healing from advanced cancer, advanced infection, things like that, far beyond the medical intervention. And many of the factors that resulted in that benefit were spiritual factors of, prayer, meditation, going within,
connection to others,
of believing you have purpose. There are many different ways to connect those dots. And I find that then the next big level of all this kind of mind over matter would be the kind of miraculous healing we find in near-death experiences.
Spirit over matter.
Spirit over matter, for sure.
Spirit over matter.
United mind. Not just the individual mind, but our mind shared with the mind of the universe.
And heart.
And heart, of course. It's a heart consciousness, as Karen reminds me constantly. It's not this brain-mind wrestling match that I often talk about. Heart consciousness.
I have to say, when Eben says mind over matter, I know he means all of it. But when people hear mind over matter, they may just be hearing, just my
teeny little mind in one individual.
That's why I always bring
Big picture, that God mind.
I know Eben knows.
We know. We speak the same language.
Oh gosh, I love you guys. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think I think oftentimes that trust factor is, and I know you guys talk about it in the book too, is sometimes where people can get hung up. I know, like Mike and I, we've talked about this a number of times. Is that trust aspect, and I've had some pretty cool spirit communications throughout my career and my life, and that comes up over and over and over again from them. Is that's the number one thing? Is gotta trust. You got to trust. You got to trust. Do you guys have any advice to people who are struggling with that, for people who are looking around going, how can I trust this if, I'm struggling with relationships or illness or bills aren't paid or, oh my God, what do I do? How can you get to that place of trust? What's worked for you guys?
Well, I think one thing is becoming familiar with this literature. So in other words, the more Ken Ring wrote 30 years ago, he was one of the founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANDS.org. And he wrote that his research showed that many people could benefit just from knowing about near-death experiences. And in fact, they would accrue many of the very same benefits that NDEers had. No fear of death, trust in the universe, that there was a benevolent force, a loving force that had their back and would take care of them. And the more you kind of study this and read these accounts, and I would especially recommend IANDS.org and NDERF.org, which is the NDE Research Foundation of Jody Long and Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Long. His wife is Jody.
Yeah. Jeffrey and Jody Long. But there are many different resources. And then also, I think we may have mentioned before, but for anyone who wants more knowledge of the scientific base and reality of this kind of spiritual discussion we're talking about, go to bigelowinstitute.org. And there are 29 essays there that won a contest back in 2021 of proving scientifically the continuity of consciousness after permanent bodily death. And by becoming educated about these things and combining that with a regular practice of going within, centering prayer, meditation. I try to meditate an hour or two a day. I find it incredibly valuable in this journey. But, my NDE gave me that gift of trust, that I can trust in the universe. And in so many ways, people who study this kind of thing, take this kind of program to heart, learn more about it, go to these resources, and then take the time out every day for meditation and going within, putting that little ego mind into time out. That's where we can really gain the trust through personal experience.
Well, and I would say that the way to generate that personal experience of trusting is to start with some small projects for yourself. Start to, manifest a certain thing in your life. And it can be very small, like a bird will fly by the window at a certain time or something like that. It doesn't have to be a big, giant thing. But you got to start opening your mind to these possibilities. And then when those events happen, that is almost, universally, I'll say our first reaction is, oh my God, I must be crazy. That couldn't be real. And so we doubt our own experience. And I know, I had a dream about my stepfather after he had died. And I, was like everyone else. Oh, I was worried about him. I must have just made that up. But in that dream, he gave me some information that I then shared with my mother, who validated that information to be true, that I couldn't have known any other way. Those kinds of things start to build your trust, that you're making real connections. I know not everyone can go take remote viewing courses, for example, but maybe there's something in your local community. I took animal communication courses, Reiki, all kinds of things that you can kind of dip your toe, and that brings the validation. I know in one of my first animal communication classes, we brought photos of our animals, and someone brought a picture of a cat who I was paired with. And I'm not a cat person. I don't know what cats' habits are.
Dogs.
I love dogs. I'm a dog person. And I had to read this cat, and I asked the cat, what do you like to eat? And the cat told me butter. And I thought that was the weirdest answer. And yet I told of this cat, and she said, oh yeah, he loves to jump up on the table and lick the butter. And so I was correct. Where did that come from, right? Not because I had a cat from long ago that ate butter or something, but that's how the trust builds slowly over time as you validate your own personal experiences. And be careful with who you share them with, because not everyone is going to be validating. Some, and they're in my, I have these families. They're like, that's nonsense. Don't tell those people, right? And be that person. I call it to be the safe space for others. When others come with those kind of stories, listen, validate. Even if inside you're going, that sounds wacky. Tell them, oh my gosh, yes, just like you're having emotions. Those are your emotions. Nobody can tell you that you shouldn't be having that emotion. The same thing with these spiritual experiences. So that's how we can build trust, is to be that safe space for others. And then when we're ready to maybe share something, choose the appropriate space so we're not put down immediately.
I love it.
Oh, me too. Gosh, these hours go so fast. I was looking at the clock and it's like, oh my gosh. If you guys would be interested, we would love to have you guys back to continue this conversation.
Find some topics and we'll follow your lead.
We'd love to talk more. I think this subject of creating our reality and manifestation, I think needs to be delved into more. This idea of macro psychokinesis, all that kind of a thing.
Sure.
Would love to continue to get into that if you guys are up for it. But
Sure.
thank you so much to both of you, because this is so invaluable to I know for Mike and I, and to everybody else listening. This is this information is just so important, especially nowadays with all the crazy going on. So thank you so much, both of you.
Well, our pleasure. And thank you all for having us on. And thanks for getting this out to the world. Doing some great work.
Yes, thank you so much. And don't just all your listeners remember that catalysts for change are often uncomfortable. And so when we see all of this going on in the world, we can hold on to that vision that this is all for change for good for all of us. So.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. And we'll be doing this again. We're going to be back.
All right, of course, we had another great conversation, and I really like them. They're really nice people, as well as knowledgeable about this particular topic.
Yeah, and I always feel every time we talk to them that I come away feeling more connected. They have this way about them, this energy about them, that I feel more connected just by being in their presence. And I think that's what true alignment with this stuff really does.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine who I talk to about spiritual things a lot. He's not a guru or anything like that. He's just someone of like mind, and we bounce ideas off each other and have conversations about our experiences. And he was super excited when I told him that not only have we talked to Dr. Alexander once, but now twice. Because there is so much, like we mentioned, and like we mentioned in the conversation, to learn from his experience and other experiences like this.
Yeah, I think that really gets driven home the more discussion, like you were saying, that we have about this, is that there is no ending to this. There's not a point at which we go, okay, we're done. We figured it out. We're done. Yeah. Like there isn't that point, which I think is what makes this journey so interesting and remarkable. And it's unique for every single person that takes it, but it takes courage and vulnerability to get there. And that's the one thing that I really loved about our conversation this round, is that we got to examine ourselves and look at ourselves as to like what is bringing these people to this to these acknowledgments and recognitions. You, myself, Dr. Alexander, Karen, all of these people. It's everybody's got this story. And recently, I was reading an incredible book by George Mumford, who is he wrote an amazing book called Unlocked. And in the book, he's actually the performance coach for the Edmonton Oilers and Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan.
So a bunch of losers.
Oh, nobody knows who they are. Yeah. And what's so remarkable in this book is that much of what we have talked about with Dr. Alexander and between each other, and it is all in George Mumford's story as well, because he understands this idea that consciousness, when we connect into consciousness and we practice that connection and we familiarize ourselves with that's what begins to speak through us. It's not our effort, it's not our action, as we've talked about with these incredible people. He affirms that as well, and that's how he coaches the teams, is that you have to practice the meditation, get into that open state. Everything Dr. Alexander was talking about is coming through in George Mumford's teaching. So, and his story, interestingly enough, is very similar to stories that, your story about addictions, having rough life on the streets, like all of these different things. He had to hit these sort of rock bottom points, as we've talked about, in order to get to where he was. So here's the story repeated again and again and again in order to sort of get to that knowledge. It's about going inward and just cleaning out what you got to heal.
I know it might sound odd to some people, but I am really grateful that I went through the hardships that I did. I am so grateful for them, because it led me to this stuff. It led me to this
Absolutely.
amazing way of life and thinking. So, yeah. I mean, everything does. There is no such thing as a bad thing, which I know people will challenge me on that, but everything is an opportunity. Absolutely everything is an opportunity, and you can find some use in every single thing that has ever happened to you. And I have had some terrible things happen to me. So, and I find them absolutely useful to me in my growth, spiritually, mentally, emotionally.
It's all in how and a lot of how we frame what we're experiencing, and if we're willing to seek that aspect of the experience.
Mhm.
It's like how is our ego processing the experience? Is it our ego, or is it our higher self that's processing these experiences? And here we just finished this incredible conversation where we're piecing all this out, that everything has some semblance of growth to it, no matter what's coming down the path. And can you begin to see these challenges as a gift, or are you going to get stuck in ego and victim? It's very interesting, but it's a decision. I've just come to realize it's a decision.
It absolutely is a decision. It's one that is made abundantly clear in my life that you hear, we are the captain of our own ship kind of thing. And it's true. It is absolutely true. We are creating as we go along. So, there's always going to be tough things in life, but it's what we take away from them that, and people say, "Oh, Mike, you haven't had a very hard life." And you really don't know.
Yeah.
There are some things that some people are like, how can you forgive that person? How?
Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily for me or for them. It's also for me,
Yeah. It comes back again to, George Mumford talks about it in his book, this idea of pure performance, not peak performance, but pure performance.
Mhm.
And it's the being in the moment and coming back to that connection, over and over again, which is exactly what Dr. Alexander talks about, living in a mindful universe. Is just, the idea of mindfulness is not this, yoga,
It can
yoga. Well, it can be, but I'm thinking like sort of the stereotype image of the yoga person with the Starbucks and the, very wealthy. It kind of has this stigma to it, this idea of mindfulness. It's this thing that people practice when everything's going well for them, and it's not. This is, you pull out your tools when things are in the gutter. That's when you need these tools, and that, remembering that the universe is friendly. This is a friendly universe, and if you make that decision, stuff begins to happen.
Well, there you go. So thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this super fascinating expedition.
Oh, yes. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Brown, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.